Good morning, everyone. I'm assuming you can hear me. Hope you can. My name is David Leibtag, and I'm an early childhood mental health consultant at Ohel Children and Family Services. I supervise a number of programs, specifically programs that combine both mental health and education. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Norman Blumenthal, a clinical psychologist, who's our Director of Trauma and Crisis Response. And we're here to talk about parents and children emerging together from the cocoon. Before that, I just want to share briefly with you some of the things that we do at Ohel. We are, first of all, we're pleased to partner with Be Above to present this webinar. But Ohel is a very large social service agency, initially housed in Brooklyn. We also have a campus in Far Rockaway. And I bring that up specifically because we do provide mental health services. And certainly during the present lockdown, we provide telemental health, where we can provide counseling through technology like Zoom and other platforms. Phone numbers on the bottom should you want to reach us. We also have on our website a number of very important resources that can be available to both parents and professionals as well. We have a number of we have a number of parent groups, both in English and in Spanish. We also have a teacher support group. They meet regularly to help parents and teachers navigate through the current crisis. In addition, we have sponsored a Smile Club for young children, which I'm proud to say that a number of members from the Be Above group have joined, and there's still a couple of days left. You see, we're still available through the first week in July, so you can still join up by contacting our office. We'll be happy to help you. And finally, what else we have here? One of the other items that we've put together to help guide children through this crisis is our COVID-19 time capsule, which originally came out in English. We put it into Spanish, we put it into Chinese, we put it into Yiddish, and we have one for day schools as well. It's a coloring book that helps children process the current situation. That's available on our website as well. And most recently we put out is a special thank you to teachers, both for preschool and for grade school, to give those special heroes, our teachers, the kind of acknowledgement and thanks they certainly deserve. And finally, just to say that Be Above and Ohel have partnered together to provide services in early childhood centers. And presently we have one of our mental health consultants, Kai Dix, working at the Be Above on Central Avenue in Far Rockaway. And so today we want to talk about how do parents deal with the current situation, particularly as things begin to lessen up a little bit. What has happened to our children over this period of time? What has happened to us? How do we work together to help us come back to whatever this new normal is supposed to be? And before I turn it over to Dr. Blumenthal, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that we've been in lockdown for 3 months already. There's been protests that are going on now, a lot of political unrest. Kids have been out of school for a number of months. Camp is in question. School is in question. There's a lot of uncertainty. And with the uncertainty comes a lot of stress and anxiety. So I want to take a few minutes to share with you what is the most important thing your child needs right now. And the simple answer to this is children need a calm parent or caregiver. Kids observe us, and they do what they see more than what they hear us say. Kids are excellent observers, and they model our behavior, and how we respond to a current situation is often how they will respond to that situation. So this presupposes, of course, that if we're dealing with stress and anxiety, we're able to control that stress and anxiety. And how do we do that will be a large discussion coming up soon. But what I want to share with you is something that we call in the helping professions self-care. Self-care basically means that before you take care of somebody else, you have to take care of yourself. And this is true for doctors, for nurses, for therapists, and most importantly, for parents. Parents are key caregivers. And so parents need to take care of themselves before they can take care of children. You may remember in the olden days when there was airplane travel and we used to fly. And as we got on the plane, the flight attendant would make the famous announcement that if the air pressure in the plane drops, we're going to drop uh, oxygen masks. And they tell you to put the oxygen mask on your child before you put it on yourself, which is somewhat counterintuitive because any parent,
When you
any caregiver, you know,
put it on
who,
yourself before you put it on the child, you get mixed, David.
okay, all right, see, I should put my oxygen mask on right now. Uh, but they tell you to put the oxygen mask on your child first before you put it on yourself. It's counterintuitive. You as a parent, or sorry, put it on yourself first before you put it on your child. Um, and it's counterintuitive. Most parents would want to put the oxygen mask on their child first. That's what all parents would do. But what we know is that if the parent is not available for the child will not get any assistance, any help at all. So it's critical that parents take care of themselves. And so what I want to share with you is 4 simple things to help with your own personal self-care. This is whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent, whether you're a caregiver. And I've done it by a simple acronym of the word self, S-E-L-F. 4 things to keep in mind. I'll briefly review them with you. S stands for sleep, E stands for exercise, L stands for laugh, and F stands for family and friends. And what do I mean by that? The first one is S is for sleep. And this is really very difficult for parents because parents today are carrying so many different responsibilities. Besides being a parent, you also have a profession or you have some other work to do. And you're just running out of time. And the only thing that you can give up on is sleep. But you need to have adequate sleep. When you have appropriate sleep, your body is able to deal with stress much better. There's a number of neurochemicals that are released into the body when you sleep properly, and that provides a sort of cushion for the stress and anxiety that we're dealing with. How many hours? Just curious, how many hours do you think you're supposed to be sleeping at night, according to most research? You can hold up fingers if you want. But the answer is 8, actually. Okay, 6. Thank you for trying to answer that question. But no, 8 hours. 8 hours generally is very difficult for most parents. But if you want to be there for your children, you got to get to sleep. Obviously, it depends. Genetics and health and so forth can make some difference. There's generally a range from 7 to 9 hours of sleep, preferably for parents. And it's almost like charging your phone battery. Every night you go to sleep, you plug your phone battery in. So when the morning comes, that battery is charged for the entire day. And that's what sleep does for you. So the best way to be available for your child, frankly, is to have a good amount of sleep. So S stands for sleep. Number E, the second letter of self, is E for exercise. And physical activity is really so important during this period of time. It reorganizes the brain so it's more responsive to stress, and it helps lessen anxiety. Getting a little bit of exercise, even a half hour a day. One of the best things to do is just simply to walk, get outside, get some fresh air. That will, again, energize your body, provides, again, a number of neurochemicals that help the body be responsive to stress. L stands for laugh. And it's very important to get some kind of relaxation during the course of the day. Your ability to relax, your ability to laugh also provides a cushion for you to deal with the stress that you have. It when you laugh, it actually triggers certain physical emotional changes in your body. I when I dealt with young children, whenever they seemed to be sad, I would share them a very simple technique by just taking your 2 fingers and putting it in your mouth like this, and automatically it causes you to smile. And that smile reaction, which is the precursor to laughter, helps a child deal with the various issues that sometimes go along with stress and anxiety. One of the things that I do, frankly, at night at 11 o'clock on Channel 11 is Seinfeld. I don't know how many of you watch that show, but I find it, even though I've watched every show and I know all the lines, but just watching it again, it just helps you regenerate. uh, your system. Um, so, uh, and I'm reminded about, well, the famous story of Jacob the warrior. How many of you know about Jacob the warrior? He used to worry all the time. Um, so one day he came up with this great idea. He's going to hire Isaac, right? He's going to hire Isaac to worry for him. And after this happened, everybody saw this guy Jacob, who used to be called Jacob the warrior. He wasn't worried anymore. He was walking around very happy, excited as could be. And they asked Jacob, how did you come? How did you move from being Jacob the warrior to being Jacob the relaxed guy? So he said, very simple. I hired this guy Isaac for $100 a day. They asked him, $100 a day. How are you going to pay for that? He says, I don't know. It's his problem to worry about. So that should give a little bit of smile to some of you. But finding humor, one of the silver linings in this whole pandemic that we're in is some of the humor that's come out. It's absolutely fantastic. But finding ways to relax, things that you enjoy doing that bring a certain amount of pleasure to you, certainly to give you a smile on your face, these things can be very helpful. So S is for sleep, E is for exercise, L is for laugh, and the last one is F for family and friends. We are, as you all know, we are social animals, and we survive and thrive in making connections with others. So the more connections that we have, it gives us a sense of belonging. And when you have a sense of belonging, you celebrate together, but you also share burdens together. So there's so much research on the fact that if you join together with other people, it gives you a sense of calm. One of the worst punishments that are done to people is solitary confinement. And the opposite of that is one of the greatest things you can do is connect with other people. So just to review, the most important individual in your child's life right now, or your student's life right now, is you, right? The caregiver, the parent, and that parent needs to be the calm parent, the calm teacher, because children, again, they reflect on what they see, and what they see, and what's most important to them is you. And all this begins with taking care of yourself, self-care. S is for sleep, E is for exercise, L is for laugh, F is for friends and family. And with that, it's my pleasure now to introduce my esteemed colleague, Dr. Norman Blumenthal. Dr. Blumenthal is a clinical psychologist who's our Director of Trauma and Crisis Response. And he's going to give you some really deep insights into parents and children emerging from the cocoon together. And if we have time towards the end, I'll unmute everybody and we can ask some questions. Thank you. Dr. Blumenthal.
Hey, thank you very much, David. And it's a pleasure to be here today and welcome everybody. I hope everybody is well and your loved ones are well. David had a hard time trying to straighten out who you're supposed to give oxygen to first. I think many of us who've had children home now for about three months probably don't want to give oxygen either to ourselves or to our children. But this has been a very harrowing time, and hopefully we'll be able to make some difference and address some important issues, especially now as we're starting to emerge from it. Let me invite people, besides at the end, I'll speak for probably about a half hour and then we'll have some time, but let me invite people, if they'd like, to use the chat option. We have 77 people here, so it's a large group. So sometimes a little hard to do this in terms of live questions, and what sometimes works better is to use the chat option. At the bottom of your computer screen, you'll see there's an icon next to participants that says chat. You can click on that. You can either comment or ask questions. It can be for everybody. You can do it in such a way that everybody sees, but if you want to ask you want to ask a question and remain anonymous, you can make the question, address it privately to myself or to David Leibtag. And we'll try, if I see that there are questions or comments on the chat, I'll stop every once in a while and look at them and see if I can address them. If it's a private chat, in other words, I certainly won't divulge who it came from, but I may ask the question on the forum here publicly. If it's such a question that you don't even want it asked, then just please mention that in the chat and I'll try to address it later. I just reiterate that we at Ohel are available. Certainly I can speak only for our trauma team. We're available to anybody who has unique circumstances that might need a more individual approach. We are providing counseling at no charge with full confidentiality. So please contact those numbers that were listed, listed on the brochure and listed that David mentioned. If you'd like, if you feel you need or you know anybody who does need more tailored or individual kind of assistance. This is a hard topic for a number of reasons. First of all, when you're dealing with people, it's very hard to generalize. There's no one type of parent, there's no one type of teacher. Everybody's situation, even in circumstances like this, are very unique. And in fact, the more extreme the circumstance, the more trying the circumstance, the more individual we become. I sometimes use a metaphor. Imagine a carpenter who is going to build a tool shed. So he can experiment. He can try different types of material, he can try different ways of building. Worst thing that happens is that his tools get wet. But if he's building an extension to his house or he's building a child's bedroom, he's going to use the methods and the material that he knows from his prior experience works well for him. And we're no different as human beings. And we have nominal problems, so we can try different ways of coping. And somebody could suggest a different way and we can try it. There's no great cost. But when we're facing the types of challenges that we've been facing the last few months, we're going to rely on what works for us. And what works for one person may be toxic for another. So we are very individual. So if hopefully some of the things I say will make sense to you, you'll connect to it. Some of them might say this just doesn't work for me or it doesn't work for my child. And you're right. It's not that, as I said, there's not one size that fits all. Human beings are unique and distinct, and everybody's situation is distinct, even though we are all sort of sharing this. Somebody said once on a webinar that I was on, another person said that we may be all in the same boat, but we're not in the same ocean. Or maybe we're all in the same ocean and not in the same boat, however you want to put it. I remember once one set of parents who unfortunately lost a child, and the mother was trying to describe to me how she and her husband are grieving. And she said, we're both in the same roller coaster, but I'm in the first car and he's in the last car. Well, sometimes I'm going up and he's going down. Sometimes I'm going to the left and he's going to the right, but we're on the same roller coaster. And I think that's true in a situation like this. We are all on the same roller coaster, but we're in different places and we'll experience things differently. And the other thing is and that's very important in terms of this situation, is that we're kind of like not here or there. We're sort of on the middle of a journey, because it seems, at least here in the New York area, it's different in different parts of the country, but in the metropolitan area, we're coming out of it for now, and hopefully for good. That it is obviously, all the statistics show that the curve has flattened. Hospitals are opening up to other patients. The emergency rooms aren't crowded, or the hospital themselves with just COVID-19 patients. First responders are not getting anywhere nearly the calls that they had been getting 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. So we're kind of coming out of it, and I hope for good. Other parts of the country are now having a resurgence, or for the first time are having high rates. But let's address us locally here. So we're coming out of it, but we're not out of it completely. So there's still recommendations for precautions. There's still recommendations for social distancing and wearing masks in public places. So we're sort of not here or there. It's almost like as if you're traveling. If you're traveling from New York to LA, there's a point when you're not in New York, you're not in LA. You're flying, or you're driving, or taking a train, whatever, and you're sort of not here or there. And that's a hard place to be. We like to be set in a certain place. In a paradoxical kind of way, in some respects, it was easier when we were at the height of this coronavirus, when we knew exactly what to do, that we're quarantined and we can't go out and we have to exercise hygiene and only leave if we must and take all these precautions, or the way we were before all this happened, when we just lived our lives, and especially for urban dwellers, lived very comfortably in close proximity to others. And now we're kind of like in between. And the same thing for our children also. We're telling them now we can relax a little bit. We can allow us more socialization. We can allow more activities we haven't allowed in the past. We're not as vigilant as we had been previously, but we're not out of the woods yet either. And there is a distinct possibility, which we're going to address at some point, that there could be a resurgence. There's much the medical field doesn't understand now. Another very important point to understand in terms of trauma, and this is a bona fide trauma that makes this hard as well, which is that there is a tendency when you're in a traumatic situation not to experience the full impact until the trauma is over. Now, this may sound contradictory, but I'll explain it and make sense of it. But let me give you a few examples. I think where we see this most dramatically in our trauma work at Ohel is survivors of residential fires. I don't know if anybody here was a survivor of residential fire, or know of anybody who was a survivor of residential fire, but let's even assume there were no fatalities or serious injuries, okay? But you lose everything. You don't have documents, you don't have besides, you don't have a place to live. You don't have your driver's license, you don't have pictures, you don't have clothing, you don't have a bed to sleep in. It's like everything, you lost everything. So you have to find quickly some place to live. And then you have to find temporary arrangements to live. Then you have to, if it's your own residence, you have to deal with, or even if it's a rental, you have to deal with the insurance company, the insurance adjuster. You may have to rebuild a home or find a new place to live. And a year later or 2 years later, you've gotten all your documents back, you got all your pictures back, you have your brand new wardrobe, you've either rebuilt your home or found a new place to reside, and everything is comfortable, and that's when the nightmares start. That's when the startle reactions start. And the reason for this is that when you're in a traumatic situation, which requires a lot of sort of your attention, you have to take care of things, the brain does something very adaptive. The brain sort of takes the trauma, the emotional trauma, and parks it. It sort of files it away and says, I'll get back to you later. And because if you were to experience the full impact of the trauma, let's say, again, if I use the example of the fire, and you wouldn't be able to make all these decisions and handle all these pragmatic decisions. So therefore, as I said, it sort of remains dormant. And then when things are better and you can sort of get back into a routine, you can sort of go into automatic pilot, that's sometimes when the emotional impact hits you. So I think it's a safe assumption. We've all been highly vigilant. We've been busy. We've been trying to preserve some sort of routine in the home. We've been trying, which I'll talk about soon. Well, we've been trying to keep our children's education going. We've been trying to keep our own sanity. And many of us also in terms of our work requirements, either whether it's teaching or whether it's any other kind of work to keep keep our activities going, even though we can't go into the office, can't go into the classroom. So we've been very busy. And therefore, I think it's a safe assumption that some of the emotional impact of these difficult times that we've been through is been filed away. And as we come out of it, and let's be optimistic and hope that, let's say this September, things are going to be back to normal, or soon, or October, November, just about when we're back in our old routine and kids are going to school and we're going to work and we're more comfortable being outside and mingling among other people. That's maybe when the impact will hit us. So we have to kind of be aware. And I just want to warn people, because sometimes people are very much taken aback by that. I mean, not an uncommon call I get is, I don't understand, Dr. Blumenthal. We're fine now. Why now am I feeling the full impact? But that's the manner in which trauma works. Okay, now let's talk about how this has impacted and how it's going to translate into our emergence. The general rule that we have focused on as we speak about the impact on children and on ourselves of the quarantine and the threat of the COVID-19 is what was will be more. Now, I see this in the chat. Let me just take a quick look. We're up to 80 participants. That's very impressive. Okay. He posted the phone numbers. Okay, appreciate that. Okay, but again, I welcome anybody who has any kind of even input or questions, if they prefer, to use the chat option, and we'll try to address that. But okay, what the general theme has been, what was will be more, and that goes for both positive, for strengths and resilience, as well as for vulnerabilities. So your coping mechanisms, which we all have, we're, for the most part, we're functioning, successful people. Those coping mechanisms you have, those healthy, endearing relationships that you have are going to be stronger, are going to be better. So whatever you have, as I mentioned, like with the carpenter, whatever works for you, whatever your sources, or even as what David spoke about in terms of the self-care, you're going to employ all the more. So in some respects, we're better in crisis. It sort of brings out the best in us, or brings out the best in our lives, those cherished relationships, hopefully ones that we have in our own homes that we don't have to relate to remotely. But even those who remote to remotely, it will be stronger because that's what works. And by the way, we can never minimize contact with others in terms of a coping mechanism. A study that I've been quoting quite a bit during this time and many of the webinars we've given, and I'll quote it again, is a number of years ago they did a study where they took college freshmen. We psychologists love doing studies with college freshmen because a college freshman for $10 will do just about anything. And they brought these college freshmen to a hill, a very steep hill, and they gave them a heavy backpack. And they said to them, we want you to climb this hill with this heavy backpack. But before you climb the hill, we want you to estimate how difficult the hill is, how difficult it would be to climb. Then when you get to the top, we want you to assess how hard it was to see if your guess was right. So that's how they presented it to the subjects of the study. However, the difference was one group climbed the hill alone and the other one climbed it with a friend. And pretty consistently, the people who climbed the hill with a friend estimated the hill as less hard, both on the beginning and at the end, demonstrating that if you are in a stressful situation and you're in it together with others, it's the same hill, but it just doesn't loom as large. It's not as imposing as it is if you're doing it alone. So therefore, again, when we say what was will be, not only in terms of coping mechanisms, but those cherished relationships and those connections that we have that invigorate us and make it tolerable. And there is one silver lining is when you have a situation like this is that we're all in it together. It's, for example, the research on natural disasters demonstrate that if there is an event that affects an entire community, the fires in California, the mudslides or earthquakes or flooding we went through here during Hurricane Sandy not so long ago, when it affects an entire community, it's somehow easier than when it's one single family. In other words, again, I'm sorry to talk like this, but if one family has a fire in their home, it's harder than when the entire community does. So the relationships become very important. So what was would be more so, but also what was in terms of what maybe had been a weakness or vulnerability is also going to be stronger. So again, we tend to look at it in terms of conditions and relationships. Excuse me. So those relationships that are problematic, and I'm not talking about severe problems. Now, obviously those fall into categories. I'm not talking about abusive relationships or high levels of conflict. But those, usually what we're talking about is the generally good relationships, but they're those pockets of problems or a relationship that has manageable difficulties. When we're cooped up, when we're stressed, those manageable can become unmanageable. So if we're talking about, say, a partnership or marriage, or we're talking about a parent-child relationship or sibling relationships, if they are difficult or problematic in a quarantine situation or in the stress that we're in as we're trying to emerge from it, they're going to be more pronounced. One area that's gotten a lot of attention, both before and during this, is the issue of anxiety. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware that there is almost a meteoric, unprecedented rise of anxiety among our children. And the reasons why are beyond the scope of what we're speaking of today. But if a child prior to the COVID-19 crisis was prone towards anxiety, now as we're in it and as we're emerging from it, are going to be more anxious. And CVS reports a 30% increase in anti-anxiety or prescriptions of anti-anxiety medication. We are experiencing, both adults and children, much more anxiety. Now, the anxious child, as we're talking about emerging from this crisis, the anxious child is the one who's going to hold on to the precautions, or the anxious adult. In other words, are going to be much more cautious coming out of it, going to be much more fearful the first time that they go out and maybe play with other children. They're going to do it with a great deal of trepidation. And some of the research on people emerging from quarantine actually show that the quarantine behavior persists even when the necessity for the quarantine is no longer there. One of the ways in which I often portray that is that if you think about it, the brain adjusts much slower than reality. Reality can happen in a split second, but for us to emotionally and mentally adjust to it can take a lot longer. An example that maybe many of us are familiar with, I don't know if anybody here or if you know somebody who may have lost a lot of weight, somebody who may have been, by all appearances, obese and overweight, whatever, and then go on some of these like crash diets or some of these very, carefully prescribed diets and shed 60 pounds, 100 pounds, something, and now they are within the range of a normal weight, normal appearance. They'll look in the mirror and they'll see a fat person, because for the brain to adjust takes a lot longer. And the same thing is true, especially for anxious children, anxious adults, that they're going to be the ones who are going to have a harder time adjusting now to this emergence, and the adults will as well. And by the way, one thing that's extremely important, and I get back to David's metaphor about putting the oxygen on yourself first, is if you're anxious, your children will be anxious. Anxiety is very contagious. And the way, if you think about it, that's adaptive, because anxiety is useful sometimes. A fear serves a purpose. The first time your toddler wandered into a busy street or tried to wander into a busy street, you made that kid anxious because you don't want that kid to ever do it again. And that ensured your survival. So the capacity to impart anxiety to someone else, if we look at it from an evolutionary perspective, is adaptive. If in the Middle Ages you lived in some walled town and was subject to repeated attacks from enemies, and and the ability to ring the bell and make everybody alarmed and alert so they could mobilize and defend themselves, or i.e. anxious, was necessary. So anxiety is contagious. So first and foremost, if you think your anxiety is disproportionate, and again, that's the tricky thing with anxiety, because some anxiety we need. It was anxiety about catching disease that helped us take the precautions that were necessary and to some extent still is necessary. So, you need some anxiety. But if it's disproportionate, it's disproportionate in you, it's going to be disproportionate in your child, or it might not be. It might be that you really have it, the proper level, but your kid is prone towards anxiety. Anxiety is to some extent constitutional. It's to some extent governed by the central nervous system. So the overly anxious kid is going to have a much more time, is going to need a lot more time easing into some of the new circumstances that we are starting to face now in terms of less restriction, more public gathering. However, there's the opposite extreme, which is the kid who has too little anxiety, which is the kid, the daredevil, the risk taker. And that's the kid who, as soon as he can or she can, is going to shed the mask and run out there and play intense basketball on top of everybody else, or whatever else, or act as if there still doesn't exist some element of risk or danger. So that's the kid who you have to sort of rein in, or you yourself. You have to sort of self-examine. Are you the type or another type of child who may, in a more rash, unthinking way, plunge back into reality? Would be the dysregulated child, the ADHD child, the conduct disorder child. And these are the kind of kids for whom being confined and restricted is very difficult. And they may be the one who very impulsively want to run right back to the level of communal connection that might be risky, or not take as much precautions, such as mask wearing or washing hands or not touching the face, etc. So again, you have to know yourself. Now, if you know your chat, let me take a quick look. I see a chat came up, so let me just see if that's... Okay, so that's a very good question. Someone asked, what if the child continues to be afraid to go and play with his friends? Should you force him? So that's an excellent question. I'll tell you why it's an excellent question. If you want to overcome anxiety, if you want to come over here, this is the paradox of treating anxiety, is the only way you can overcome it is by putting yourself in the fearful situation. So let's say myself as a psychologist, suppose somebody comes to me because they have a fear of heights. They're afraid to be in high places. That's just not an uncommon fear. I could sit in my office and talk with them from today till tomorrow all about their heights and where it may come from and what part they may have had some childhood experience with being in high places and what high places feel. And nothing's going to happen until they put themselves in a high place. In other words, they have to be in the situation for their sort of the natural associations with fear to be removed. And so therefore, a child who is afraid to engage in what is considered appropriate levels of interaction with other peers and playing because of this. Let's say it's a child who is prone to anxiety. Maybe the child has, particularly, there are some children who have very specific types of anxiety. So it could be social anxiety or fear of illness or something like that. the only way they're going to overcome it is to be in that situation. Now, should you force the child? That's the question. So it's very delicate. I don't like the word force, because if you take a kid who's afraid to be out there and you just take him by the nape of his neck and put him in that situation, he's going to have a panic attack and he'll be more afraid. So you may have to ease the child back in. Now, easing the child might mean putting some pressure on, and easing the child might mean gently compelling the child to be in a particular situation. But it needs to be done in gradations. It has to be done slowly and carefully so the child doesn't have an adverse response, because the adverse response will make the anxiety worse. Now, if you're really stuck, if the fear is extreme and all your best endeavors are not successful in getting him back into appropriate social surroundings, then you may need some professional help. It might be necessary, and as I said, Ohel is available, but certainly there are many clinics and facilities that are doing TheraZoom treatment, or even now starting to open up and have actual face-to-face sessions with 6 feet distancing and mask wearing or whatever. So then seek out professional help, or read up yourself, since many of you are teachers and professionals. So, but do it in a more scientific way. But yes, you have to be in the situation in order to overcome the fear. And again, as I said, you yourself have to be. If you're going to try to send your child, let's say, to day camp, or back to the playground, or back to school, and you yourself are a wreck about it, you're not fooling your child. They read us like books. Sometimes I tell parents, children have radar. They read us, and they're gonna know, and it's not successful. So you have to grapple with it yourself, and then come to the right conclusion. Now, again, also, you have to do it as I just mentioned now. Don't rush, do it gradually. And another very important part, if you're introducing behaviors that are, especially if you have some of the more fearful children, if you have some of the more reckless kids, then you have to sort of rein them in, and you have to preserve some fear. And you may have to impart fear to that child, because that child needs fear. But if it's the more anxious child, is introduce them, let them know. It's very important to have an awareness ahead. I'm just going to give you 2 examples. One is some research even in therapy, that if a therapist is starting treatment with a patient, if they orient them to how therapy works, or if they're going to a group, to orient them to how a group works, they actually benefit more from the treatment than if you don't. So preparing and creating the mental mindset ahead of time is very important. I remember once I needed something repaired. And I had a neighbor at the time. He was a retired firefighter, and he had a garage with every tool and every type of nail, nuts, bolts. He was a very handy guy. And I brought something, I needed it fixed. And I was in a little bit of a rush. I needed it fixed so I could do something. I don't remember what it was. And he's a retired guy, and he's taking his time, and he's thinking, and he's looking. And I guess he saw I was impatient. I was a young guy. That was quite a few years ago. I was once young. And he turned to me and he said something which was so wise. He said, 90% of a job is the preparation. And that stayed in my head. So prepare them. And by the way, if your child is, let's put it this both ways. If your child tends to have, or tends to have more anxiety, they're going to resist. And that's okay. They should. Or for that matter, if you're telling a more rash and impulsive child, we're reintegrating into society, we're allowing this, but only up to this extent, or etc., they're going to be pushed back the other way and say, oh, come on, that's crazy, everything, there's no such thing, it's over. It's, they may give you some of those more rash responses. So expect a sort of pushback. And then the other thing we have to keep in mind, and I know this is going to make it much more complicated, is that we don't know. There's a lot of unknown about this situation, and we certainly don't have a sense yet of what kind of trajectory this is going to take. And ambiguity in and of itself makes us anxious. We don't like uncertainty, as I alluded to before. We feel much better when we're sort of grounded. And we don't know what's going to be? We don't know. Will there be a resurgence? I mean, the historical precedent that many people reference to this is something that happened 100 years ago, which was the Spanish flu. And indeed, with the Spanish flu, in this time of year over the summer, it looked like it was over. And then in flu season came, and it came back with a vengeance. Now, we've come a long way since since 1918. And so I think we're a little more knowledgeable, and maybe, and also perhaps maybe closer than they ever were in terms of treating the illness. I hope so, because there's a frenetic activity to try to find the vaccine and the treatments. But there's a possibility it'll come back. So as we sort of reacclimate to more normal living and communal living, we have to have in the back of our minds that we might have to pull back. So we have to be still vigilant. So it's a very hard place to be, to say to ourselves and to our children, okay, you can go to this day camp that is practicing hygiene, is not allowing children to be overcrowded in the indoors, or whatever the medical field is saying is the necessary precautions. But it could very well be that in 2-3 weeks we may be sending you home again, and maybe we're going back, and that's very hard to do. So we need to, as we prepare, we need to have that in the back of our mind. I see a chat came up, so let me quickly reference that and see if it's something we should talk about. Okay. Okay, very good. So these are good questions. With the 3 months of limited or no social interactions for kids, how impactful do you think that'll be on their long-term social emotional, adjustment would be the goal? So that's a good question. I think it will be. I don't think we're going to come out of this, and I think it would be a misnomer to think we're just going to merge this and just be our old selves. So we're all going to be affected and changed. Who will be affected more or less might depend. Now, for example, the child for whom socializing is difficult. May not have had again, I'm not talking about severe cases, but a child for who has social anxiety, or maybe awkward or clumsy in social interactions. Now, and especially, and then there's been a number of the calls we've dealt with or groups we've run, is people are describing situations where they were working with the child on developing better social skills. So working with a child, we ran a group for parents of children with learning disabilities, and many parents mentioned that they were just they're getting some momentum on some of the remedial work, and now suddenly it's all stopped, or it has to be done remotely, which is nowhere nearly as effective. So those children, there could be a regression. It could be a setback, or interestingly enough, we have found that many of these kids who do, for a host of reasons, have social difficulties, whether it's what we would colloquially call shyness, or we call it social anxiety, or maybe some of the kids who are overly aggressive and have trouble containing themselves and may get into fights or are not always so welcome in other people's homes. This has been a welcome break. They have not had to socialize. And now to deal with that, which is a struggle, it may be more difficult, and we could see an exacerbation. I think that's distinctly possible. Children, again, as I mentioned earlier, prone to anxiety, they're going to have a more anxious time. Now, the other question that we're grappling with, and for that we need, if you will, prophetic vision. We need to predict the future. I often like to quote the great New York philosopher and theologian Yogi Berra, who used to say that prognosticating is very difficult, especially about the future. We can't know. We can't know because in general, we're not good at predicting behavior, but also we don't know what the circumstances will be. But I think we're wondering, and that's certainly something I'm struggling with, what if the kids don't have their usual summer, whatever the usual summer might be, whether it's camp, whether it's time in the park, whether it's swimming, whether it's just sleeping late and having some time to play video games and chill and relax. If they don't have that kind of recreational summer, in what kind of condition are they going to come back to school? Will they be able to, let's say school does open in September, will they be as prepared as they would be in the past to handle the rigors and demands of an education when they haven't had that time to run around, to exercise, to have fresh air, sunshine? We know how healthy the kids look usually when the summer's over. And will that have some bearing on how much academic work they can do? There is, and again, the educators can speak to this better as well, as will they have a harder time getting back into the momentum of it? I mean, they've had Zoom classes, but I think there's a consensus that those haven't been incredibly successful. Let's put it this way: the kids that they've been successful, the kids are going to thrive anyway. Are they missing? They lost some basic skills, and I think it's going to make a difference also in terms of academic topics that rely on background more so than others. So, if they missed out a certain period of history, maybe that's not as harmful to them education than if they missed out on some basic math skills, than which other later math builds upon. So I think it really depends. It's hard to say. On the other hand, though, and I do think this is very important to say, is that children are very resilient. Sometimes people ask me how I can do this kind of trauma work, and I have many answers, but one of the answers is I see a tremendous amount of strength, resilience, unity, and especially from kids. I will very often tell parents, if they're facing some impending hardship, challenge, trauma, something like that, that you're going to call me in 3 months and just tell me how blown away you are by your children. So kids will adapt and they'll adjust and they'll manage. So I don't want to create this sort of panic, but I do think there'll be residual effects, and probably most of the residual effects will be in those areas where the child is most vulnerable. So the kid with learning disability may be more. The kid who is depressed, depression may be more. The kid who is hyperactive may be more hyperactive. So we may see some of that. And I think we have to be prepared. We have to brace ourselves as we return to normalcy, that there could very well be some residual effects, and especially among the kids who, to begin with, are vulnerable. I see, so there's another question here. And what if teachers and staff don't get their usual vacation time? That's true also. And parents, the summer is a time, even if the kids are home, that you just, you don't have to make sure they do their homework. You don't have to they can sleep late. They can, you can be a little more lenient about different types of entertainment. Although, please don't just hand your kid over to the videos. If you're Fortnite, it is so addictive. There have to be limits, but it is a more relaxing time, and we all need that, and teachers too. There's certainly a time for replenishment. And there's something nice about coming back with a whole fresh look, and et cetera. And if the summer has been stressful, the teachers are not going to come back as replenished as well. And I think it's fair to say that we may have to consider a more gradual reintegration to formal schooling if schools are allowed to be opened, and to introduce some of the more demanding aspects, and school does, education has to be to some extent demanding, more gradually than we had in the past. I think that's important as well. By the way, another thing to keep in mind, and I think especially as we deal with children, is children's time perspective. I'm sure, you remember how long it took for you to get from one birthday to another? And now you want to just hold back that clock because you barely got used to this age and you're ready the next one. Time flies when you're older, and 3 months is a lot less time for adults than it is for children. And therefore, as we're talking about reacclimating to school and reacclimating to a communal life, we have to realize that, let's say if we factor in the summer, 5 months, 6 months of being out of a formal academic setting, away from that kind of large group socialization, is a very long time for a 6-7-year-old, and therefore may more likely lose some of those skills or need more time to reacclimate than adults for whom 6 months flies by much quicker. Now also, I've been asked to speak about what about the absence of structure, and how people, and the truth of the matter is that adults need structure until children need structure. We don't need to be in an oppressive slave labor camps, but we need some demands. It does mobilize us. We do have to, some are better than others in terms of self-discipline, but sometimes if we don't have external demands and we don't have external expectations, we're going to lapse into laziness. And certainly children naturally gravitate towards recreation and self-indulgence. It is part of the uprearing, it's part of upbringing, is to get them acclimated to foregoing certain pleasures and self-indulgences for the necessities of education, and ultimately for working and making a living. So we need structure. And again, some children are better than others in self-discipline and structure. Some children are better self-entertainers. If your child is a reader, or if your child is capable of engaging in imaginary play, or if your child has hobbies and interests, your child takes to a musical instrument, and these are children that will be able to provide themselves with necessary stimulation. If your child is somebody, and I'm not saying something with an iota of judgment, everybody's different, but if your child is a much more social child, if your child depends much more on socialization to feel fulfilled and to let the time fly, they're going to have a much harder time with the limitations and the relative absence of socialization. And some kids do need much more external structure. So you can't portion it out equally. And you're going to be, if you're managing a home and with children, you may have to provide more structure for some children than for others. Also, by the way, I think it's important to keep in mind how much children need change. The more, if you will, hyperactive, the more child, let's say on the continuum, who's a little bit more towards need for novelty, etc. The typical, maybe this, let's say the moderately ADHD child cannot be expected to engage in an activity or something for an hour or two, may need to do things in 20-minute spurts, whereas another child who's more, let's say, studious or more, by just nature, temperamentally, is more calm and contained. You can put them on a site or give them something to do, and they'll take to it. They'll take to it very easily. So again, you need to know your child, and by the way, you need to know yourself. If you're going to be overtaxed as a parent or a teacher, if you're going to overdo it, it's going to boomerang. And you're going to come to a point. You yourself are going to be fatigued. You yourself are going to be short-tempered, and it'll be in the long run probably more to a greater disadvantage. Rally those who can help you if you have within your home or even remotely. Other figures who can take over some of this responsibility, even older siblings within limitations, let them do some of it. And then to some extent, you may have to just let the child develop at least some capacity for self-entertainment, et cetera, or you relying much more on remote socialization. One question that's come up quite a bit, and I only have 5 minutes left, so I'm going to try to address that quickly, although there's much more to talk about. Is a question we get asked. We're getting asked a lot in the contact we have with both parents and teachers. Is what happens if you decide on a certain level you're allowing your child to relax some of the restrictions, but his or her friends are being more lax. Or for that matter, the other way around, that the bigger problem is when you want to be more cautious. You want, if they're socializing indoors, you want them to wear a mask, and the other children are not. And your child, understandably, does not want to be different. He doesn't want to be the only nerd with a mask on, and they're coming home complaining. And your feeling is you've researched it, and you have to be very careful in today's age of information that your sources of information are from reliable places, are from reputable institutions or government institutions, and you're not being swayed by anything and everything that's posted, because not always is it reliable. But you've spoken to your pediatrician, you've accessed the government CDC, health department, reliable source, and you feel that this element of precaution is still necessary, and your kid's coming home saying nobody else is. First of all, please call the other parents. You'll be surprised. I have this all the time where a child comes back and says, you're the only one, and you're the only, and why are their child being allowed? Because they told their parents you're allowing it. I often say to parents that children are meeting during recess and plotting against us, and we don't do anything about it. So you'll be surprised. There's a good chance you're going to find that other parents share your point of view. So if you can, check it out with other parents, and it's certainly going to work much better, especially if your child's younger and has a more contained social network. Obviously, a teenager who must have a much broader social network, it's harder to do that with, but certainly with younger children who tend to gravitate towards kids in the immediate neighborhood and not too far away, and probably with children whose parents you may know, it might pay to check it out, and if you can organize a sort of policy among all those children, it's going to save you a lot of grief. But let's say not. Let's say your child comes back and says, everybody else is allowing this, that, or the other thing, and you're the only one who's not. And let's say you've established that's true. You may have to rethink. Perhaps you are being, maybe you are more the more anxious end, and you may have to rethink the standards that you've established. But let's say you did that, and this is who you are, or this is how you feel, or you think that this is correct, and the other people are wrong. Then you may have to stick to your guns, and there's nothing wrong with that in situations like this. It would not be helpful to send your child out taking chances that you're making you anxious and worried, because that anxiety and worry, besides eroding your own well-being, is going to be imparted to the child. So sometimes you have to say we're different. And this is what we're adhering to. Maybe it's a good lesson, because there are times or sometimes you have to take we have to be sensitive to communal standards and convention, but sometimes we have to take an individual stand when we feel strongly about it. And you may have to do that. In some respects, that's harder for younger children. In some respects, it's easy. In some respects, it's harder. It's harder because kids, elementary school age children, like to be like uniformity, like things being the same. Teens are much more tolerant of difference and being distinct. On the other hand, elementary school age children tend to be more obedient. So you can take a more sort of formal, forceful stance. Just say, this is the way it is with us, this is what we're doing, whereas teenagers tend to be more rebellious and may resist parental authority. And if you are in a situation like that, please don't make it a war, especially now with there being so much tension and are being so confined. Any kind of stressful interactions are probably contraindicated, and you may have to allow that risk to take place. Again, it may also have some bearing on, do you have people at home who are immune deficient, elderly, or something? Then you may have to even be stronger about your position. But this is a common problem. I'm like about 3 minutes left, and I do want to just mention one or two very quick things. First of all, let's realize, and I think it's just food for thought now, as we said earlier, we're not just going to wipe our brow and go back to being who we were. This is too big. It's going to impact on us. And the world's changing, and life's in many ways. There are many changes sort of brewing right now. And it's hard to anticipate how that's all going to work out. But we have to start thinking about it. And we have to think about it for another reason also, which is that if one of the antidotes to the pain of a traumatic situation is to be able to say, well, at least I grew from it. Not to say that we needed this. I mean, we don't know why we need this. It's been so disruptive. But if we can cull or mine from the situation some lessons in life, and there are many, or some ways in which we can improve as individuals or as society, then it takes away from some of the senselessness of this. And I think we need to think about that. I think we need to think, what's going to be the role of technology in education from now on? We've relied on it so heavily. Is Zoom going to be more part of our lives? How are we going to look at health and contraction of disease when all this is over? Even if the COVID is gone, there could be another one. Are we going to do less handshaking, social kissing? Are we going to be more bowing, elbow bumps, or whatever? Is this going to change? Are we going to be engaging in more hygienic practices? Are we going to be teaching children to wash their hands more, use hand sanitizer, not to touch their face as much? Are we going to be more alerted to certain symptoms? We should think about how we're going to change. I mean, is medicine going to change? Even in terms of some of the social and political upheaval, our race relationships going to change? Is law enforcement going to look different? There's a lot happening, and it is helpful to think about that and process that, even with our children, to teach them that that's what we do. We garner lessons from difficult situations. Okay, I see my time is up. There are a few other things I want to say, but I think I'm running out of time, and we all have very busy schedules. So I appreciate you listening. I hope it's been helpful. And again, I invite people to contact us. You can contact me if you want through Ohel. If you have any further questions, or if you want some more specific advice or assistance, during these difficult times. And on behalf of Ohel and on behalf of Be Above, I certainly hope that we're all going to look back on this soon as a difficult time, maybe like a nightmare. It was hard, it was difficult, but that we'll be able to resume our communal connections and education and all that somewhat enriches us from being part of a community in the very near future. Thank you.